Well, again, good evening, brothers. It's great to see everybody. Continue to pray for our brothers in Ukraine as well. Just thank you, Joshua, for remembering them. The families that I mentioned are I think that everyone in the church has evacuated, so they have also evacuated as well. So I don't know where they are now. They left on foot with everyone else, so it's still very difficult. The Russians have blocked several of the exits out of the city, so some challenges there. To keep praying for them. All right. Well, let's see. Let's just pick up where we left off last time we got together a couple of weeks ago. And what I wanted to do was just we're continuing to look at the last few topics here for the first module, and the focus has been on the exposition, the preparing of the sermon, and then the delivering of that sermon. And we're really at the last step of our focus is on the last step here, and that is I want to, Lord willing, talk tonight about what do we bring into the pulpit with us, and also begin to talk about the sermon delivery itself. And so would appreciate your input as we go through some of those things together. We've covered a lot of different topics and issues related to preparing the sermon. We discussed the objective of the sermon, and then also the structure of the sermon, the body, the introduction, the body, conclusion, and if you remember the 6 P's for each of your outline points: the point, the proof, the picture, the persuasion, plan, and the problem. And then the writing of the complete manuscript, and we discussed some of the advantages for doing that. The question then is, once you've done that, what should you bring with you as you teach? And there's once the manuscript's been written, there's then the process of considering what kind of notes should I have with me as I deliver the sermon. And again, there's really a range of that, right? There's having nothing, just bringing your Bible with you into the pulpit, all the way to bringing the full manuscript, as well as the Bible in the pulpit. So and then there's a variety of options in between that I will talk about for a minute, for a few minutes. So here's some of the range, the options to consider. All right, there is, again, you could bring no notes with you. I know several brothers, they don't have any notes. They just bring their Bible, and they've put in all of their study, and they've even written out a manuscript, but they don't want to have that as a distraction. So they feel like they just go from what they remember. So they have no notes at all. I'm very impressed by the guys that can do that. They just have a Bible. Some guys just bring a simple outline with them, where they have the homiletical idea, which is, again, remember the main points, sermon main points, and outline. So they just basically bring that with them into the pulpit, just to remind them of the key points and the main sermon main points, so they can remember to repeat that. Other brothers bring in more of like a full outline, where it's the outline, but then they may write out the introduction and conclusion, or at least a few points to that, or they might write out each of the outline points, at least just make a statement, and then some comments just to remind them. Others bring basically the partial manuscript, like we talked about, where they have all the bullet points, So they have the outline, and then with each outline point, they'll put the 6 P's there and some of the ideas for each of those. So they just have maybe a sentence or two for each of those. So it's just a much it's not just an outline, but it's got a few more notes to it just to remind them. And then there's of course the full manuscript, which is the whole sermon written out. So as you can see, there's a range of options, and the question is, well, what should we do? Which of these options is best? And that will depend a lot on what we talked about last time, which is the, oops, sometimes give me a second here. Looks like sometimes my Microsoft, I've been having trouble with my Microsoft. Oh man. Okay, let's try this again. Sorry, brothers. All right. Let's see if that works. Let's do this. Okay. All right. Okay, there we go. So how do we decide what to bring with us into the pulpit? What should we consider? Again, ideally, you want to be as extemporaneous as possible. If you remember, extemporaneous preaching is not using your notes so much and being able to be fully engaged with your hearers. So you have eye contact, you're not reading from any notes, things that's the ideal. But having, a longer, more of your manuscript with you in the pulpit will then help you to remember what you want to cover, and also you'll have the clarity as well in the way you've worded things. So again, you can go back to our previous class. We talked about those advantages of having a manuscript, but the danger of that, or the potential problem with that, is with the full manuscript, the temptation to be looking at your notes most of the time instead of your hearers, and that will make you less effective in communicating those. So what I've noticed, usually there's advocates to have no notes or to have all your notes, and typically what I've seen, those who argue to use no notes, they'll often point to examples of preachers who didn't use notes. George Whitefield is a famous one. He would often, he was a well-known evangelist in America in the 1700s, and he would ride on horseback to different places and often preach while sitting on his horse, or he would get off the horse when he entered a village and people would gather around and he would preach, and he very often used no notes at all, and was well known as an excellent communicator, very engaging. And so because of the fact he preached outdoors, outside, preached often and impromptu, he would not have notes with him. And so, but the thing we need to remember is, before using people as examples, and people do this also they advocate for a full manuscript. Many people will often use Jonathan Edwards, because they say, well, Jonathan Edwards used a full manuscript and he would even read from his manuscript, and he was around the same time as Whitefield, and he too had a huge impact on the church. And so we should use a full manuscript because Jonathan Edwards did. And then other guys say, no, don't use any notes because George Whitefield didn't use any notes and he was very good. So there's people trying to argue for one side or the other. But we have to remember with these guys, one, they were gifted in a certain way, right? They had very special gifting from the Lord. And so George Whitefield, he would preach the same sermon many, many times. He was an itinerant preacher, evangelist. So he would often preach a handful of sermons several times. So he got to know those messages very well. And he didn't really need notes because he had rehearsed and preached so many times. So we have to be careful to keep that in mind. And Jonathan Edwards, though it is said that he did read from his notes, he still was able to preach with great passion and conviction. And even later in his ministry, it is doubtful that he actually read from his notes. That's some people believe that's just a maybe a story that developed over time. But even if he did, I think the important thing to consider is you're thinking about what do I bring with me as I'm in the pulpit. You need to bring whatever it is that will allow you to do your best at preaching the message. That's basically, I don't think there's a right or wrong way here. This is my opinion. Whether you use notes or not, or an outline, or partial manuscript, or a full outline, or even the full manuscript, that really depends upon how you will be most effective in communicating the message. Remember the goal is, in our preaching, we talked about the objective of the sermon is to be accurate, number one. Number two, to be clear. And number three, that we are applicable. That is, our sermon is directed to our hearers, calling them to respond, and that we are passionate, we are engaging. All right. And so for some of us, if we have a full manuscript, we will not be passionate or engaging because we're just looking at the manuscript. But some of us, if we don't use a manuscript, we might forget much of what we had from the passage, or we may forget the outline, or we may not be as clear. So really, I think it depends on what will make you most effective. All right. And if I say, well, George Whitefield was one of the best preachers, so I'm just going to not use notes because he didn't use notes. Or Jonathan Edwards was very impactful, and so he read his manuscript, so that's what I'm going to do. Or John MacArthur, he uses almost a full manuscript, and oftentimes will refer to it. Or so people will pick these pastors and they would just do what they do because they're a good preacher. Well, what they do may not be the best for you. So you really have to, I believe, again, this is just my opinion, but I believe you have to find what will make you most effective. And so I recommend guys try different things. I like to use a full manuscript, and then I highlight different parts in the manuscript so that I'm not looking at it all the time, but I'll see a highlighted portion to remind me of the next thought. So I've tried, though, not using any notes at all. I've preached a few sermons that way, and I couldn't remember very much. So it wasn't very good message. But I tried a few times. A couple times I did it because I had to, because my notes were lost, or I preached one message in Kenya and the interpreter put his Bible over my notes so I couldn't see them. He just stuck his Bible on the pulpit, and it was in the middle of the sermon. And so at that point I said, okay, no more notes. So, but yeah, I've tried preaching without notes, and I found that for me, I'm not very effective. I've tried using an outline, just an outline of pulpit, and it also was not, I was not able to remember my flow of thought or the illustrations, application. It was hard for me. So for me, over the years, I have found the full manuscript to be most helpful for me, but I have to work very hard not to keep looking at the manuscript. So usually I don't have a full manuscript anymore. I have just maybe 2/3 of my sermon written out, and the rest just comes as I preach. But I have one brother who teaches in the program, the TEA program. One of the professors, he doesn't use notes at all, and he's very good. He tried using a manuscript early on in his preaching, and he couldn't. It really affected his ability to speak, to be engaging with the hearers. And so one day, somebody told him, "Why don't you preach without any notes and see what happens?" And so he did, and he found out that he was very effective. So he stopped using notes. Sometimes he might have an outline with him, but he just is able to remember what he studied, and he was not bound to his notes. So I think it's really depends on you, and what is it that will help you to be the most accurate and clear, but also engaging and passionate, and applicable. So maybe I know many of you have been teaching or preaching for a long time, and what have you found to be helpful for you as you to make you most effective? Anybody want to share what's been useful for them? Joshua, what have you, from your experience, what have you found most helpful for you?
Is it about the notes that I use?
Yeah.
Yeah, not the full manuscript, but areas where I need more explanation, so I'll highlight them. But areas that I will just have to extemporaneous, so I will just put some keywords there. So that's how I do it. Not the full manuscript. Yeah.
So you'll have, you have your outline, and then you fill in.
Yep.
Like just short sentences for each point or idea, or do you have some?
Yeah, some are short, some are long, just depending on which one I need, clearer sentences. Yeah, those areas I'll put longer, more explanation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Steve Lawson. I don't know if I shared this story with you, but he was telling us about when he was in the Doctor of Ministry program with R.C. Sproul. Did I tell you guys this story? And he was preaching. The students had to preach, and so R.C. Sproul would be in the back, just watching them. And so Steve Lawson says that as he was preaching, in the middle of his sermon, R.C. Sproul got up and he walked up to the pulpit while Steve Lawson was preaching, and he grabbed his notes off the pulpit and he took them with him and sat back down. So Steve Lawson had no notes right in the middle of his sermon. They were taken. So R.C. Sproul wanted him to be more engaged with the hearers, so he just took his notes. Steve Lawson still uses a manuscript. I've seen that, but it helped teach him the lesson though of, you know, you have to still be engaging, you know, and eye contact and all of those things, extemporaneous. And so the challenge, if you have, the more notes you have, the more tempted you are to look at them, right? And rely on them. And so that's okay to use them, but if you're preaching to your notes more than you're preaching to your hearers, that can be a distraction. And so you have to learn how to use those notes in a way that won't be a hindrance or a distraction. So, you know, I've seen guys that will like, you know, have their notes, maybe they're holding them up, or once they are done with one page, they'll, you know, pick up the page and put it down. And it's very distracting if you do that. You have to be a lot more discreet with their notes, I believe. Just again, I don't want to distract people from the message. And so I have to think of ways to essentially, if I have notes or a manuscript, can I preach in such a way that people don't know that? So sometimes I'll ask them, you know, I'll ask people that if, or they ask me, you know, do you preach with notes in the pulpit? And so I like to hear that question, because that tells me they don't really know if I have notes or not. So I'm being effective in that way. So anyway, Pastor Philip, what have you found to be most helpful for you?
When I was a young preacher, I was so afraid to audience, so I wrote every single word. And yeah, as you just told, I was preaching to my note. And yes, my members kept telling me, look to the audience, yeah, more engaged. Then right now, I think I just wrote down a small note with outline and sometimes very contracted sentences. And if it is really important and I would love to highlight to the audience, then I make I choose the wording, the grammar, and then I read it two times. Yeah.
Okay. You go through your notes a couple of times before. Okay.
Yes.
So when you were preaching to your notes, did your notes get saved? Did they repent?
I don't think they
I mean, your notes. Did your notes repent? I'm making a joke.
No.
Not a good one.
No. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. How about you, Pastor Dwayne? What have you found? I know you like to do more extemporaneous. Do you use any notes with you when you?
Well, when I was in Singapore, I was there 25 years. I handed handouts out. I had everything outlined, and you know, verses and some quotes and things. Then when I began to graduate to PowerPoint, I did that with PowerPoints. I found it kept me on track. I tend to get carried away. It's you know, again, it depends on the situation. Out at the prison, that was pretty much well, yeah, that was pretty much all just from the Bible, from texts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I usually have a lot more material than I ever heard. My problem is I need to be careful. I don't try to cover too much. And I just get one or two things across good, you know, and not try to, I guess they get confused if you bring, I get confused if I bring too much in. And so a PowerPoint or a outline definitely keeps you a little bit on track and you know, gets you focused. Depends how the Lord leads. Sometimes one point is, you know, just all you're going to do, and sometimes more. It just depends on how much the people can endure and how it's going, and it depends a lot on your audience. You know, if they're going to sleep on you, you got to do something fast.
Yeah.
And so you just, I suppose, you stay flexible as to, you know, how the Lord is leading and how it's going. You know, I guess it's, but yeah, you've got to, the writing it out word for word, I've never done. You know, I get, I just don't know. I guess for an assignment, I'm going to have to do that. And I found it, you know, quite refreshing to do a little something different once, because I've never done that. And well, this week we've listened to a educators conference. We have this English material, and so they had a conference, and I was reminded of what I grew up with, and it was everything we shouldn't do. You know, and they did David and Goliath a lot. And then it was a little boy with the was it 3 loaves and 5 fishes, or was it 5 loaves and 3 fishes? They did a lot with stuff like that. It wasn't expository at all, and so yeah, I got to preach the word. My wife kept hammering at me, you know, stop telling those stories. So she got sick of the same stories over and over. So, but you know, at the prison, you didn't have to tell any stories because they didn't have any problem.
Yeah.
With they were interested. They were, you know, they were focused. So yeah, I don't know. You again, I think it's pretty much how God has gifted you and how God leads you. But you've got to do your preparation. You've got to have a lot of stuff ready to go. And I usually have 2 or 3 directions in mind, depending on how the Lord leads and who's there.
Yeah.
You know, it depends to who's there. If there's generally there's not too many strangers there, but once in a while, you know, people do show up. And I know up at Fraser Hill we went, and Jensen brought Weichi, and she was just, of course, he had just met her and wanted her to, you know, I suppose, hear the gospel. And boy, we threw the whole program out, and we did everything quite a bit different than what we had expected. And yeah, a few months later, because of that, she turned a corner. And so that was rather interesting. But oh my, yeah, I think it pretty much, you got to pray about it as to what the Lord have you do. But yeah, to preach through the Bible, that's important, to preach through text and not to do just topical things all the time. And stories, you know, I mean, there's narratives, they are easy to do, you know, because you can always pull something out of a narrative. And just about every message we heard these last 2 days was like that. They were doing education things, and they found education in everything. And of course, the principles of education and everything. And I mean, it wasn't what the Bible was saying at all. It was, they were using it. And yeah, I've gotten to the point where you've gotten me where I get disgusted with that. That's not right. We need to preach what it says, and we need to dig it out and do word studies and check the grammar and get into word meanings and stuff like that. That's rich. What is it saying? You know, and then yeah, okay, well.
No, those are some really helpful points. I think you're exactly right. Is sometimes the setting that you're teaching in can determine, should determine what kind of notes. So yeah, if you're in a prison, and I've taught in prisons and other special ministries, and it's going to be a lot more impromptu. You won't necessarily have notes, or it just won't work if you're having these notes with you and you're trying to talk directly to your hearers. So or if you're in a Bible study, maybe it's less formal. Maybe you're sitting around the table together. And so, if you have a manuscript that you're looking at the whole time, that will be very distracting. So it will be probably a lot. The notes that I use for that setting is a lot less. But if you're preaching to a large group of people and it's just you speaking, and more like a classic sermon approach, maybe there's a large group, then you might want to, for me, I use more notes when I'm in that kind of a circumstance. But even then, like you said, Dwayne, I was preaching at one church on a particular passage, and as I was preaching, I noticed people were, becoming less focused. I realized my sermon, actually, the pastor had asked me to prepare a message for parenting, something related to parenting. And so, but as I'm preaching, almost everybody in the audience were older people with their kids were grown, or they were single people. So a lot of what I had prepared really wasn't where it was not where they were at in their lives. Their kids were grown. So I basically totally departed from what I had prepared and just tried to focus more on how they can help parents and how they can be, if they have grandkids. So, but it was one of those situations, Dwayne, like you mentioned, whereas you kind of see that people are not really listening anymore, and then I realized, this message really isn't for them because they aren't in that part of life. So I changed what I was doing. So yeah, there is flexibility in even like I told you in Kenya, when my notes got covered, I had to change. So I think that's an important factor in considering as well. Some places, it's fine to use notes. Others, you won't want to or shouldn't, because they'd be a real distraction or hindrance. I remember I was at a gathering, a graduation for some young men in the church, and we were just there. It was a party, but the family had invited all of their extended family. Many of them weren't believers, and then they asked me, hey, could you say a few words? Could you give a message to our sons? So at that moment, I didn't bring any notes. I didn't even have my Bible with me. So I had to prepare, a 15-minute message at that moment, directed to these young men, but also recognizing most of the family there was not a Christian. So there, I didn't have any notes. I didn't say, can you give me 30 minutes so I can go home and get some notes and come back? So no, that was an impromptu message with no notes. But so again, I don't think there's just one way you have to do every time you teach. I think that will, you have to be flexible and recognize the circumstance, the hearers, the type of message that it is. I think, regular preaching on a Sunday morning to the congregation, for me, I would use more notes. I'd use a full manuscript. But these other situations, I would modify what I do. And then even when I'm preaching, I was just preaching this weekend, and I went very long. I did a lot of extemporaneous preaching on my first point. And so I noticed the time was getting away. So my second point, I modified. I didn't use my notes. But the first point I did. but I realized, you know, I didn't want to go longer. It was there was a special meeting afterwards, so I couldn't go longer than the time they gave me. So I changed. I changed my approach, you know, 3/4 of the way through the sermon. So
A real good thing to develop is your testimony.
yeah,
I use that a lot, especially where it's applicable. You can approach your testimony in a lot of different ways according to the situation, but that, you know, there's always some text involved in that.
you better
And
know it.
yeah, and that is very effective because you can get excited about, because that's your experience.
Yeah,
And that I've used that a lot.
yeah,
And on deputation, I just turn it over to my wife because, of course, she's Chinese and they only give me 15 minutes. And so I just put her on, and that's the best thing I can do because it's, you know, it's, you know, they want to hear about the field. Well, there she is, you know, and she can, I guess, communicate the most information in the quickest. Anyway, I don't know. It's you know, it's something you have to think through carefully. But your testimony, develop it, you know, and expand on it. And you can. I use it about 20 different ways depending on who's there. And oh yeah, another thing. If you're like Jesus was a construction worker, he has a lot of illustrations about building houses and doors and all kinds of things like that. I was a farmer, so I knew a lot about pigs. I can talk about pigs and cows until you're blue in the face. Some of you guys got gardens. You can talk about gardens. We have on Friday, we have little kids here. So we've been doing olive tree. We did the fig tree. We did grapevines. And of course, we've done just about all the animals. And that is really effective, as you can make a biblical application real good. So don't be afraid to use your own experience. If you're a carpenter or you're a stone layer, oh, there is a multitude of you know, I guess stuff you can get really excited about because you know this. And maybe, you know, your people can identify with this. You know, just, oh boy, yeah, it's fun. It's really amazing because you know, you're what that word, engaging. And yeah.
yeah. For
I don't know.
illustrations,
Tim, what did you
application.
do? You were a programmer before. That would be, I don't know how you could bring that in, but I bet you get excited about that.
Yeah, I worked in the electronics industry, so yeah, certainly our experiences can be very helpful for illustrations and application. And even sometimes, you know, if you notice your hearers seem to be distracted, you know, sometimes kind of giving a related story or something to your passage to kind of get them back in, sort of like the introduction, right? One of the goals of the introduction is to get attention. And so sometimes you may need to do that in the message. But are there anybody else have any thoughts or comments, or what approach do some of you other guys take when you're teaching, as far as what you bring with you when you teach? Anybody want to share anything from there? What have you found most helpful?
I find using like iPad helps with bigger font, as you know, as the eyesight
Ah.
works.
Yeah, I do bring my my glasses with me in the pulpit, because sometimes my eyes cannot see as well, or the lighting, or those kind of things. Anybody else want to? Tanging, how about you? what do you use for, do you use notes when you teach, or you're still figuring that out?
Yeah, most of the time I use full manuscript, but I am not controlled by my manuscript, because if I'm doing that way, I am like stuck to my note. but I I have to try to focus on like the important word, the definition or the Bible references. But sometimes, uh, along the way, for example, when I go to my church, like our church service, along the way, like on the bus, something very good comes to in my mind, better than my manuscript sometimes. So uh, I'm practicing in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why even going over your notes beforehand, as Pastor Philip mentioned, you know, you read through your notes a few times. Yeah, sometimes an idea, an illustration, or something comes to your mind. So same for me. So I'll write some notes on the side just to remind me about that. So you know, a lot of this is just with your own experience as you do more, as you teach more or preach more, and you learn about how, yourself and how you're most effective, and getting feedback from other people, I think is extremely helpful and important. So, you know, I would definitely ask people, you know, uh, if they find you, are you engaging and easy to follow, or, you know, that kind of thing. So it's good to ask. Anybody else have anything they want to share they've found helpful, they're learning as far as pulpit notes or anything like that?
And by the way, Pastor Tim, I think first is personally, when we take our notes, if the audience will not see our note, it will be better, because if they see our notes and like a full blank paper or something like that, they will discourage that. Oh, this someone who would be very long.
Yeah,
Maybe if a Bible can cover a note, it will be good. But that is my my personal experience.
yeah. If they see a big stack of notes, think, oh no, this is going to be a long sermon. But even too, like I said, when you're turning pages and things like that, that you really try to be careful, because then it makes it also seem like a lecture too, as well. So we just want to we want to be engaged, you know, and effective in that way. So um again, a lot of this is just, I mean, this is related to, you know, style. And so like I said, the goal, the more extemporaneous you can be, the better, right? Again, remember, extemporaneous just means speaking directly to people, not using notes, but being able to communicate directly. So the more you can do that, the better. But again, that depends on you. So there's a saying that someone told me that I thought was very helpful. You know, like I said, I typically use a full manuscript, because the saying goes, a short pencil is better than a sharp memory. Meaning, if you're using your notes and writing out the manuscript, for me, I don't remember everything very well. So I tend to do better when I have the material there to remind me. But again, the danger of that is then you're glued to your notes, you're focused on those as well. So identify ways that you can improve, get feedback from others, It's a learning experience. I think Dwayne, you mentioned this, a little earlier too, and just trying different things. See where you are most effective. And again, depending on the type of situation you're teaching in as well, will determine, what approach would work best. But this is I just wanted to sort of give you guys just to think about it. I'm not pushing for one approach over another, because for some of you, using a full manuscript will not be good, will not work for you. For others of you, you may need more notes in the pulpit to help you be more clear and accurate as you go through a passage. All right, so you need to do what will work best for you. And so that's one of the things in I've given you a passage, each of you guys a passage, if you want to practice, and deliver that message and get some feedback. I think next week I want to talk a little bit about that, how you can do that. But that's really the best way to grow, is to have someone give you that feedback after you preach and after you teach. And so that can be the most helpful in guiding and directing you as to what works best. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the sermon delivery and what helps us to be effective or good at communicating. Again, remember that there's really 3 skills that we need to teach the Bible. All right. The first skill is to be able to study a passage and find what it means in the text. And that's why we went through those many steps, the exegesis and those steps. That's to help us guide us how to study a passage. But that takes a skill, an ability to interpret and to do those steps. So that's one skill, is the ability to study. That helps us to be accurate. There's a second skill that we need, and that is to be able to put together a message that is logical, that flows, that is easy to follow, that accurately reflects what the passage means. So that's sort of a second skill. Not only do we need to be able to study a passage to find its meaning, we then need to be able to essentially put together a message that can communicate what that passage means clearly to our hearers. That's a skill as well. Then a third skill that we need to have is the ability to actually communicate that message verbally, to be able to bring that message in an engaging way so that our hearers can understand and respond. So those are really the 3 skills that a good expository preacher needs if he's going to have an effective sermon. There are some guys that are very good at studying, but not very good at delivering. Other guys have excellent skills in communicating, but they are not very good at putting together a sermon that's easy to follow. So we want to work at all 3 of those skills and be excellent at all of them. And so what I want to do is give a few minutes, the rest of the time this evening, just focusing on that third element, the actual delivery, the communication of the message. And in talking about that, I want to discuss the key elements of a good oral communication. Because again, in addition to the importance of what you say, you also want to be effective in how you say that. All right. So once the sermon is completed, the manuscript is completed, you've decided on what notes to bring with you in the pulpit. Now you must be able to deliver those notes. And here I just summarized what I just said a moment ago, that the 3 skills that the expository preacher must have. Again, able to study so that he is accurate, able to put the sermon together so that you are clear, easy to follow, and then to deliver that sermon so that your hearers listen and respond. Okay, all All three of these skills are important for a good expository preacher. So I want to focus our attention, like I said, the first steps in the process on exegesis really, if I could, let me go back up here. Let me just copy these to make it easier. All right, so the first one really has to do with the exegetical steps that we talked about, all right? All of these steps help us to be effective in studying the text. Then when we're forming the sermon, the exposition part, we have these particular steps to help us be effective in putting the sermon together. Now we want to look at the delivery of that sermon, or the homiletics. Okay, homiletics, how that message is delivered effectively. And so this will touch on now the sort of the oral communication skills that are required. So I want to consider really 4 elements here: your voice, your hands, your eyes, and your whole body. Okay, how are you using those to make yourself most effective in delivering the message? Okay, because when we communicate, it's more than just the words we use, it's also how we express those words through our voice, through our eye contact, our eyes, through our hands, and even our whole body. So let's talk about these 4 different categories. And first, I want to get your input as we think about this. Oral communication. Consider, how can we use our voice effectively in preaching? What about our voice as we deliver the sermon? How can that impact that message, make it better or worse? Anybody?
Yes. First of all, you're going to have to increase your volume about double right off the bat. You've got to speak to the person in the back row. We're all bound up with electronics. That hasn't helped us. You've got to get into the mode of communication. You've got to get out of your conversational voice into your, I guess, presentation, or I don't know. It's a whole nother voice. It's a whole nother level of intensity. You've got to be intense. All at once, you're motivated. You're animated. You're almost another person. If you don't have this, well, first of all, they're going to say, well, he doesn't have anything worthwhile saying because he's not excited himself. And, you've got to be heard. Don't depend on the microphone. And the eye contact. Absolutely. So yeah, it's all in your voice.
We'll get to the eyes, but yeah, the voice. Yeah, I think that's a good point. The volume. Yeah, if you're having a conversational voice, and if you're in a group of people in a room, some people won't be able to hear you, for one. But also too, as you said, Dwayne, varying that voice to convey passion or emphasis is also very important. So that's good. Thank you. That's really good. Anything else with our voice, guys, that we need to consider to make us effective in communicating?
Train your voice.
Train your voice? In what way?
Well, I used to have choir group in the morning, and they do like warming up your voice before you sing in the choir. And I find that for preaching as well, that I need to prepare my throat or my vocal cord. Just like, you know, physical exercise. You don't just run in full speed right away. You need to just warm up your body and and your body can function better.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, I find it very helpful to just you know, do some of those warming up exercises, and my voice can be clearer, and I also can preach more, because I used to just lose my voice after no, after one sermon. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're preaching more than one service, or if you have, like this Sunday, I preached a service, and then afterwards I did a presentation in a fellowship group, a Bible study, and then after that I did another um, presentation with another group at somebody's house. And so, yeah, your voice needs to last through all of that. So yeah, training it is a good thing
Yeah,
to
I'm doing
consider.
conversational English right now, and that's been an education for me as you get conscious of what people are doing with their voice. Again, we do a lot of drills in conversational speaking and conversational English, and to get the vowels, because we speak in vowels. It's a lot like vocal training for singing, except of course, singing is sustained. When you're singing, you never sing, you speak. And of course, there's a lot of, I say parallels there. And spit the words out crisply and carefully. Use your tongue, the tip of your tongue and your teeth. I have a lot of drills for lazy lips. Joshua, you have lazy lips. You know, we all have something. Tim, you're pretty good. I'm analyzing you as I listen to you. It's I understand everything, and yeah, nice. You make me happy, but some of you don't make me happy. As you know, your wife, you ask your wife, she'll tell you.
Yeah.
You know, she'll tell you the truth. She'll be brutal as to you know, and then speak diaphragmatically, project. You know,
Yeah.
put a book on your stomach and get that diaphragm going up and down when you're laying on your back. Get the diaphragm. Most of us speak or breathe with our upper body. That is the worst. There's just a lot of things you can help yourself with as you kick into high gear, and you just get automatic about it. Vocal training has helped me a lot. Okay, go ahead. I think Tim has a lot of suggestions here.
No, I'm just writing down what you're saying. So that's good. I mean, you know, people who sing, right? Who sing for a profession, they practice, they do exercises, they do vocal training. So we should consider these things as well. I think these are really helpful suggestions, because you know, speaking is our primary, if you're a preacher, that's your primary tool, right? Obviously, studies is important, as we talked about, and writing to be able to put thoughts together. Those are important. But if you do that's an author, okay? Which we need good books out there. But if you're a preacher or teacher, your primary tool is going to be your voice, right? I mean, so I think we need to give more attention to how we use our voice, how we train it, even how we speak, pronounce. I mean, you're right, Dwayne. It's I've known a lot of guys that are, you know, can speak loudly or can project well, but they can't pronounce very clearly, and then it's hard to follow them. And that's why, as Pastor Philip mentioned earlier, I think reading through that, one reason I really like doing a manuscript is I can read through it. And then sometimes when I read certain phrases, the words that I've put together are harder to pronounce clearly. And when I read it out loud, I go, oh, I need to word this differently because it's not coming out very clearly. And so that's one consideration for at least writing out your message. You know, you don't have to bring that with you into the pulpit, but definitely a way to practice kind of what you're going to say. Can you say it in a way that's clear? Because again, it could be written very clearly on your notes, but as you speak it, your congregation doesn't have your notes. They just have your voice, or, you know, or you might use a PowerPoint as well for certain things. But yeah, I think guys need to give more attention to their voice than they do. So thank you, Dwayne. Yeah, those are really helpful, practical things, and Joshua as well. So very practical. Anybody else have any comments just about our voice? And how we can
Record
use that?
yourself. Do a
All
video. Your hand phone records real easy. And just, you know, take a look at what you're doing. Just record yourself. I know it's embarrassing. I hate to do that because I always get discouraged when I see myself, but it's a good way to evaluate.
Yeah, good. Yeah, even just using you know, video record yourself. Then you can also look at some of the other elements too that we're going to talk about here. But yeah, definitely listening to your voice. Again, we want to practice. We want to do well at this, and so these kinds of things are important to be effective. Anybody else have any comments about voice? How you use your voice? I would say also too, like, avoid filler words. Right. You know, some people repeat certain words over and over just because they're pausing in their mind, right, to get to the next thought. And a lot of times when we do that, we'll go, so, right? And if you repeat that over and over, it can become a distraction, right? So be careful with those. And this is where Dwayne's suggestion of recording yourself is a very good one, because you can listen and say, oh, wow, I say that word a lot. And, you know, once in a while is fine. Not a big deal. But if I had a guy I was listening to not long ago, and he kept saying, when you get to the end of your passage, you know, and it was like, you know, it was a distraction. So much so I started counting how many times he said, and I wasn't listening to his message. So yeah, I counted in 5 minutes. He said, like almost 100 times. So it was crazy. So keep that in mind, you know, listening to yourself, or even have someone, you know, ask somebody, do I have certain filler words or words that I just repeat a lot? And is it distracting? That's important. And just train yourself when you are pausing, train yourself. You don't have to be, I think a lot of us think we need to be talking the whole time. We need to fill every single second with something from our voice. And we are afraid of pauses. We're afraid of silence when we're preaching, right? We're worried, oh, I'm gonna lose them. They're gonna stop listening to me if I don't say something right now. So we fill every second with words, with sound. And I think sometimes that's guys that often use these filler words. That's one of the reasons. So this really takes us to another aspect of our voice, is we need to not only vary our volume, our pitch, that is, speaking higher or lower, that's their pitch. We also need to vary our pace, include pauses. Brother, sometimes a pause can be just as effective as raising your voice. Because if you're speaking continuously and then you stop, that's a difference that people will notice. So especially if you've just made a powerful point, then pausing allows people's minds to keep that point there and think about it. I think sometimes we take away from our effectiveness because we may go through and make some profound statement and then we just keep going. And we don't give people time to stop and think about that particular statement. And so pauses can be very effective and to consider. So these are just, I think the idea here that I'm trying to emphasize is variety. Okay, variety. Variety in your voice as you're speaking. Because if you speak with the same monotone and have words going every second and you just keep talking like this, you don't change your volume, you don't change your pace, you don't change your tone, then that can become right? It's painful after a while. So I know guys that, and they get in their preacher voice, like Dwayne mentioned, there is a difference in your volume and your projection, but some guys, they just stay there at this high volume, high intensity. And like the sermon just becomes overwhelming if a guy doesn't change his volume or his pace or his intensity. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Variety is an extremely beneficial tool for the preacher. So I would strongly encourage, I think Dwayne's suggestion about recording yourself is a really, really helpful, practical suggestion. Or, on top of that, getting feedback from others. But listen for those things. We had to do that. We had preaching assignments where we would have to, record ourselves, our sermon, and then they gave us a form to evaluate. Do you change your volume? Do you change your pace? Are there pauses? So we would have to listen for certain things. And it was very enlightening to realize, for me, I just had to keep talking. I never paused because silence made me nervous. So, but when I listen to myself, one of my, couple of my sermons, and I realized I don't pause at all here. So I don't give people a chance to stop and think. So just as an example, variety with your voice, extremely useful and helpful tool in communicating. Again, it's not just the words that we speak, it's how we speak those words that can really enhance a person's ability to understand, to receive, and to respond. As Brother Dwayne likes to tell us, just about being passionate and engaging. You can communicate passion and engaging by your voice. That's a very helpful tool. Okay, well, I'm doing a lot of the talking here. Any other thoughts about this? Voice is such an important component to good sermon delivery. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions or suggestions?
Yeah, you've got to get out of yourself. You've got to stop thinking of yourself. The thing with vocal soloing is that you sing and you're all wrapped up in sound. You've got to forget about sound. You've got to forget about yourself. You get into the message. You get lost in the truth that you are, I guess you're communicating. You've got to forget about yourself. And of course, you got to be careful you don't go too fast. So it's slow and loud. Those are the two words that you constantly, you should almost write it on the pulpit, slow and loud, because you can't articulate if you're going too fast. Yeah, it's just a couple of things that you really got to watch. You got to keep slow. You can't do much if you're going too fast, and you've got to keep your volume up, or otherwise they can't hear you. And even if you have a mic, of course, nowadays they have the mics right on your face, wrapped around your cheek, and so it solves a lot of problems. But oh dear, we've got to be very careful about anything that distracts, and and the biggest distraction is me. I get worried about what people are thinking. That is very wicked. You're not worried. That's selfishness. That's pride. When you're worried about what people think, that's the last thing that they say. You're not a hireling. You're not doing it for money. You're doing it because you love the Lord and you've got a message. Or do you? Well, I think you do. And so, you take a part of that and you really hammer it across, and it's like, it's the last message you're ever going to hear, and everything depends on it. It's intensity.
Yeah, I think with the use of technology now, and the fact that we do have a microphone and speakers, that really has allowed, I think, open up the door for even the use of being quiet. Because the mic can pick us up. So normally, if you're in a room without a microphone, you really do have to project and have volume. So speaking more quietly, pausing, people won't be able to hear you. But with a microphone, you can actually use a quieter voice effectively at times in your message, right? When there's a sober statement or a thought you want people to ponder. If you yell and scream it out, it may come across as like just may come across as sort of you're demanding or something. Whereas if you speak quietly, slowly, and pause, that also can be effective. And so, I think just variety. And I appreciate what you said, Dwayne, about, I don't worry about what people are thinking. Worry about, are they understanding? That's the key. And that's where we get, I think, takes us to the idea of our eyes. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Well, actually, maybe we can, we'll just do that next. I'll come back to hands. So think about our eyes. Our eyes can be a very helpful resource for us in understanding or seeing how the people are responding to the message. So how about anybody want to give some thoughts? Maybe we'll start with Pastor Philip on this one. With your eyes, how can we use our eyes effectively when we preach?
Yes, sometimes I look at to the congregation.
Yeah, and how can that help us be effective when we preach the message, teach the message or the sermon?
So looking to the congregation, then that draws their attention.
Yeah, certainly that's probably one of the most important, right? Because if we're talking, if the whole time I'm talking to you guys, I'm just looking down at my keyboard or my desk, you know, or staring at other things like this, after a while, it just doesn't feel like I'm talking to you, right?
Mm.
So really looking at people is a very helpful way to for them to realize, you know, this is a communication to me. Again, that's why, you know, reading our notes is such we want to avoid that as much as possible, because people then, if you know, the preacher's not looking at us, he's not looking at me, then is he really talking to me? So that's really a basic communication, you know, effective communication technique, is that look at the person you're talking to, right? Anything else about the use of our eyes that can help us be effective or can be a useful tool for us as we communicate?
Uh,
Go ahead, Joshua.
yeah, thinking about like not staring at certain people, like that can be misunderstood, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of move your eyes, obviously in your head, around, right? Look at different people and areas or sections, right? Yeah, that can be a distraction, can't it? If you just look at one area or one person all the time. Have you ever had that happen to you, where it seems like the guy keeps looking at you in the sermon and you're wondering what's going on here? Why does he keep looking at me? So yeah, that actually can become a distraction, right? Or I think I've told you about some guys I've watched preach where they just stare at, you know, the side. They keep looking to the sides and not at us. I was at a shepherd's conference actually a few years ago, and one guy that was preaching there was doing that. He kept looking off to the side. You know, he'd look at his notes, then he'd look to the side, then he would look at his notes again, he'd look at the other side, and there's like nobody over there. And so after a while, it sort of became this distraction. What is he looking at? So it was a distraction. So we want to, you know, move our eyes around. And also too, you want to move your eyes around, right? Because some people may be distracted or falling asleep or not paying attention. So you want to be able to be scanning the whole room, you know, and looking for that kind of thing, right? Anything else with the eyes? How about closing your eyes? Can that be effective, or should you never do it? I guess you shouldn't do it if you're tired, because you might fall asleep. That wouldn't be good. But sometimes that, you know, if you close your eyes, you know, at certain parts, that can communicate a focus or an emphasis at times. Okay, so once in a while, even having your eyes closed, depending on what you're saying, needs to match, but it can convey like this intensity, right? That we would love the Lord with all our hearts, right? So closing your eyes may communicate an emphasis there. Consider. All right. Well, I'm using my eyes, and I can think if this would be a good time maybe to pause. A few guys have had to drop off for various reasons as well. So I think this would be a good point. We'll come back to this next week and talk about the use of our hands, our gestures, our body, and a few final remarks as far as sermon delivery that I think will be helpful. But again, these are just practical considerations to make us more effective. Obviously, what we say is the most important, right? To be accurate and clear. But as we communicate these things, the more we work at these other elements with our voice, with our eyes, our hands, that will just enhance what we're saying, keeping people engaged, communicating passion and emphasis and how we say things. All of this will only make our message more effective in helping people. Again, we want to help people to understand and respond. Okay, so if I get up and deliver a boring lecture, it's going to make it harder for my hearers to respond because they're struggling to listen to me because I'm boring. All right, so we don't want to make it harder for our congregation to listen. We want to do all that we can to make it easy for them to listen, right? So that's why we want to work at being effective in how we communicate, just to help them as a help to your people. I like what you said, Dwayne. It's not about us. So we're not working at these things so we can be a popular, preacher that, he's a good preacher. But no, we want to work at these things because we want our people to understand. I remember someone told me about there was a preacher that had come to town when Charles Spurgeon was early on in his ministry, and Spurgeon and this other man were preaching together at some sort of a conference or Sunday services. I can't remember. So the first man got up, I don't even remember his name, and he preached this, was very eloquent, very passionate, very engaging preacher, just excellent communicator. So he preached this sermon and was just did an excellent job. And then Spurgeon got up and he preached his sermon following this guy. And at the end of the messages, after the first guy finished preaching, they said, that guy is a good preacher. After Spurgeon finished his sermon, they were saying, Jesus is a good savior. See the difference? That second one is what we want. And Spurgeon was an excellent preacher. But the way he did it, he used those skills and he used his abilities and his gifts to direct people to Christ, not himself. And so we want to be an excellent preacher for the sake of the message and the sake of our hearers understanding that message and responding to it, not for the sake of our own skill. And I know you brothers know that, but I think we want people at the end of our message to say, Jesus is a great savior, not, Tim is a great preacher. We want to be great preachers that for the sake of directing people to a great savior. So this is why we want to be excellent so that the message itself and the Savior himself is what is clearly understood, and the people are responding to that. So just keep that in mind. When we talk about all these techniques and things, it's for the purpose of helping our people see Christ better and understand his word better, and that we get out of the way, so that they can see him. Okay. Final comments or questions, brothers, before we depart for the evening? Again, my goal is just try to be practical, and have us talk about just some of these things, just to really think about, to be the best, the most effective we can be. So thank you for your input, some great comments and suggestions. I appreciate that. Dwayne, were you going to say something?
Oh, I think so, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Regardless, the one thing I was thinking about is that in the past, until this pandemic, music, I think we've way overrated music, special music, hymn singing and all, and it has its place, but it's the preaching that we communicate Christ the best.
Yeah.
There are a few songs that preach themselves, but you can't replace the word of God. We got to be careful about filler stuff, and a lot of special music and what do you have, all that. I always was irked about how much time we wasted giving invitations, as if it all depended on us. I guess an invitation is okay, but it's the preaching and the Christ of the preaching is that needs to have our thing. I've enjoyed the Zooms because we start out with prayer and we have an hour and a half of preaching, and then we close with prayer. And I have been blessed. We don't have a lot of clutter.
Yeah.
And I think we have filled our our services with a lot of clutter. And I don't know. It's just this is a time of reevaluation. I know there's a lot of churches in the States without pastors, and I think the hirelings are dropping away by the dozens. As we need to be very careful about hirelings. We are not hired. We are not doing it for either the money or for any personal reasons. We can't help it. We've got to do this. It's my first pastors in Wisconsin were all workers. They all worked 2 or 3 jobs to be able to do what they were doing. That's when Wisconsin was a mission field. They were coming up from Moody Bible, and they were passionate. And they weren't doing it for money. Now, 50 years later, oh my, I am just really distressed of what I see back in Wisconsin as far as the quality of preachers and how they operate. Oh dear. Well, anyway.
Yeah, a lot of focus on entertainment and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and as I go back as a missionary, I'm just entertainment again. They want to hear, really weird things we do here, and that's not at all what we're doing.
Something new, yeah. I hear you.
And then, anyway, it's a complicated world, and somehow we survive.
Well, hey, I want to let you guys go. Maybe Zali, would you mind closing us in prayer tonight, or this afternoon for you? But